Coming up on this episode, we're going to be learning about a new program from the Archdiocese, the St. Joseph Foster Care Ministry, when we speak with Julie Dumalet from the Office of Pro-Life Activities and Chandler James from the Riverside Project. You're listening to Around the Archdiocese.
Sharing information, insights, and stories about our Catholic faith from across the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston, you're listening to Around the Archdiocese. Here's your host, Sean O'Driscoll.
Hello and welcome to another episode. My name is Sean O'Driscoll. I am blessed to serve as the Senior Communications Manager here for the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston. And with me today in the studio, we have Julie Dumalet, who is the Director of the Office of Pro-Life Activities for the Archdiocese. Julie, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sean, for having us.
And also joining us in the studio today, we have Mr. Chandler James, who's the Director of Church Mobilization for the Riverside Project. How are you, sir?
Doing good. Thanks for having us, Sean.
Oh, thank you guys for joining us. And you guys are here to talk about a new initiative that the Office of Pro-Life Activities is doing, the St. Joseph Foster Care Ministry.
Correct, yes.
So, pro-life, I understand.
Right. And
I understand that for most people, that usually means, okay, we're focusing on abortion.
Right.
We're Catholics. We're kind of known for our stance on that particular
Sure.
issue.
Very much.
But why is the Office of Pro-Life Activities getting involved in foster care?
So what we've had an opportunity to do since the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade in the summer of 2022, we've always been concerned. Well, first, let me say, we've always been concerned with family stability, supporting families. That's the dignity of the human person is really supported through stable, loving families. So that's always been a concern of pro-life work. In the pro-life movement, really since 1973, we've been concerned about preventing abortion first and foremost, because if we don't have life to begin with, then we can't talk about raising children well or supporting families because
Absolutely.
We don't have a family. Well, what the overturning of Roe did, particularly in Texas, is it gave us this opportunity to really focus more on this idea of family stability. We have many more women who are seeking pregnancy help, which means that in future they're going to be needing assistance raising infants, raising toddlers, raising school-aged children. And so all of that goes into, okay, what challenges are they going to meet in raising those families, and how can the church step up and support them? We've had ministries like Gabriel Project, our various pregnancy help centers, but we also have an opportunity to look at what are the ways that families may be struggling and how can the church step in and be a support.
Interesting. So what's the timeline in terms of, is this something that's happening right now? Is this ready to go? Or is this something that's slowly rolling out?
We launched this in May of this year, of 2023, and we have probably 5 or so parishes that have launched some version of the St. Joseph Foster Care Ministry. In other words, they're actively working with foster families in need in various ways, and we can get into that later. How church does that. We have about 20 other parishes, Catholic entities, Catholic organizations that are in the process of developing some type of ministry. So I think our southernmost ministry is in Danbury, in Brazoria County. Our northernmost is in Huntsville.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so then we have all sorts of parishes and organizations in between.
So it isn't just a localized thing of this happens downtown, but no, this is really to every end of the diocese.
This is really to every end of the diocese. And as Chandler can tell you, the needs are very different throughout the diocese, as you would expect, right? But it allows each parish and each region of the diocese to take a different and very specific approach depending on the needs of the particular community that they live in.
And you mentioned Chandler, and I'll get to you in just a second.
Sure.
But you're partnering with the Riverside Project.
We are.
What is that relationship about? Why are we partnering with them?
So Riverside are really the subject matter experts. When I started looking at this issue maybe a year ago, 18 months ago, I pretty quickly realized I was in over my head. The foster care system is very complex. Connecting with families in need can be very complex. It often depends on what county are you in, what region of the state of Texas are you in, even what region of a county are you in? What are the needs? And so we really needed to partner with somebody that was already working with those families, with the Texas Department of Family Protective Services, DFPS. And so it's been really wonderful. So we go in, Chandler and I will meet with a given parish. They're able to say, these are the needs in your community. And we're able to come in and say, this is how the church and the diocese can support you.
So Chandler, the Riverside Project, what exactly, obviously you're helping Julie with this. What exactly does this organization do?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. Julie described a little bit about what our partnership has looked like kind of thus far. But yeah, a couple of months ago, we kind of launched alongside Julie kind of this partnership with the diocese. And so the Riverside Project in a general sense is essentially a collaborative. We're kind of a neutral nonprofit. And so we're a network of really agencies, congregations, other nonprofits, school districts, and passionate individuals really essentially working to help transform the foster care system here in Houston. And so we, underneath that umbrella, do a lot of different things, right? We like to say at the Riverside Project, we have kind of two sides to what we do. We have a system transformation side. And so that's where you see a lot of things, our work with different residential treatment centers or group home type living, trauma trainings, our babysitter collaborative to help kind of support foster families across the city and different agencies that exist underneath that. So kind of our system side to what we do. And then we have our church mobilization side to what we do. So currently we're connected to a little over 130 different churches across the city, kind of the same span that Julie kind of just mentioned geographically as well. And so our hope on our church mobilization side of what we do at the Riverside Project is really to kind of individually, contextually, and we're like hyper contextual about the demographics of a church, where they're located in the city, because the needs in different parts of the city, as you can imagine, within the child welfare space are vastly different. And so we're really focused on where is the church located? What is the size of their staff? What is their denomination? What is their backgrounds and things like that? And then we really seek to walk alongside churches in a very individual way and contextual way to really help them kind of, if you would, which we can talk about in a little bit, kind of find their place along the river, if you would.
So you mentioned find that place along the river. Where does that name Riverside Project come from? Because I think Riverside, I don't think, oh, obviously that's foster care.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so kind of our name and the concept of really the river, if you would, it comes from a parable that's not necessarily unique to us, but we have kind of adopted it, if you would. And so kind of the idea of the parable is, if you can imagine, three friends come upon a raging river. They see children in the water kind of rushing down the rapids toward a waterfall. And if you can imagine kind of being in that spot, essentially one friend immediately jumps into the river and begins pulling out as many children as he can. Knowing that there's a waterfall downstream, the second friend runs downriver and tries to essentially catch as many children as he can before they fall over the cliff. The third friend, which I like to call the smart guy, asks a really good question. And he says, hey, why are these children in the water in the first place? And so he runs upstream to kind of ask that question of saying, hey, why are there kids in the water to begin with? And so he runs upstream essentially to find out how can he put a stop to it. All three friends, right, this is the concept, is that all three friends are running in three different directions, each addressing different yet also equally important parts of the problem, that there are kids in the water and we have to get them out. And ultimately what we find is it's not just kids that are in the water, it's actually families in the water. And so the big idea of the river is saying, hey, how can we get vulnerable kids and families within our city across Houston out of the water and onto dry land? And so a big part of what we do in that is to really help churches, other organizations, essentially, and individuals and businesses and all of these entities that kind of exist under the umbrella of kind of like our network and our collaborative efforts here in the city to say, hey, how can we help them find their place along the river? And so our connection with the diocese has been really awesome to see develop over the last couple of months, essentially to help different parishes say, hey, what is our place in this? And so parishes have kind of come across and said, hey, what can we do? How can we help? And some are saying, hey, we're already doing all of these things. How can we come alongside the river and support? And so that's kind of the idea of the river, right? This kind of upstream, midstream, and downstream type of work.
And I think that point that Chandler just made is really important. We often think, I think in the Catholic Church, we think, oh, there's a new program, so we're going to have to find 1 million new volunteers and have a new line item in the budget and
another thing in the bulletin.
Let's take away from a ministry that we're already doing well
Right.
to start this. And what we have found is, in many cases, churches are already helping these families, not necessarily without knowing it, but not doing so in an intentional way. And so if we can just tweak existing ministries, St. Vincent de Paul Society is an obvious one. Some of the things that youth ministry is doing sometimes with places like Kids Harbor is an obvious one. So it's really just about, let's slightly alter what we're doing to be more intentional about serving this population that in some ways we're already serving.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think that we're able to present parishes with that idea of saying, hey, it doesn't have to look like a new tab on your website. It doesn't have to look like a budget line item, but it's actually just recognizing, even using the parable of the river, if you would, that foster care is not an isolated issue within our city. That in actuality, it is this cycle of things that kind of just touch different aspects, other social issues that exist within our city, things like poverty, things of like lack of education or homelessness or crisis pregnancy, right? Those things both being why kids enter into the foster care system to begin with, and also things that they enter into if they age out of the foster care system without a loving and stable adult, essentially to help them stay on dry ground. And so that is the idea of the river, and really our connection with the diocese as a whole is to say, hey, how can we rally parishes around this concept of the river, and also recognize, hey, you're already doing really, really great work as a parish, right? There's so many parishes that we've met with that is like, we're already doing homelessness ministry. We're already doing crisis pregnancy, and we're already serving in these capacities. And so I think a lot of what we're doing with the parishes right now, if you would, is just adjusting some language and just saying, and helping kind of create awareness to the realities that foster care touches all of these things, right?
I think when a lot of people think about foster care, we have sort of this idea that we get from the media.
Mm-hmm.
And it's either when you hear about a child in foster care, you automatically get this idea that it's not a good situation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That there's somebody either taking advantage of the system or there's possible abuse going on.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime it's portrayed in the media, it's, well, I grew up in the foster system and that's why I am the way I am.
Right.
And it's never viewed in a positive light. You talked about making change kind of systemically, how do you affect something on this scale that has such a negative connotation when it's portrayed in most people's minds?
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I think part of it is to, kind of, as I mentioned earlier, I think is to suggest that, hey, I think when people think about foster care, we oftentimes think about the vulnerable kids, and as we should, I think. But I think the bigger scope of what we're talking about, and you kind of mentioned kind of this system changing efforts here, is to recognize that, hey, we're not just talking about vulnerable kids, we're actually talking about vulnerable families. And it's not always as linear as we think,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's not always, and sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. It's not always A plus B equals C, and this is my situation, as much as it is more cyclical. And so what we oftentimes find is that it's not, like if you talk to an adult that says, hey, I used to be in foster care. Well, a lot of times their parents were also in foster care or touched the system in some capacity. And so what we recognize is really this generational cycle that touches these different things. Like we mentioned, crisis pregnancy, poverty, lack of education, all of these things. And so I think number one, kind of to answer your question, I think it's acknowledging that we're not just talking about vulnerable kids, but we're also talking about vulnerable kids and families, and the work that we get to do, not just the Riverside Project, but the work that we get to do as churches, right, is to get to address kind of this generational cycle, and we get to help break that for a lot of families in providing support. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that that's part of that answer probably.
It does. And for the church, I think we're so focused on the family,
Mm-hmm.
as the central foundation for society, and recognizing that children are part of, a larger unit, and they're not individuals just to be managed or cared for apart from those other relations.
Yeah.
So we know we have many, many foster parents, oftentimes that our parishes are not even aware are coming to Mass at a particular place. So one of the first things that we're doing is when a parish gets involved in St. Joseph ministry is let's send out a survey that will not only ask questions like, how would you like to be involved? Or what can our parish do? But who are our parishioners? Who are our existing families that are working within the foster system? And that can be families where there's been a kinship placement. So in other words, grandparents raising grandchildren, or aunts and uncles raising nieces and nephews, as well as certified foster parents. But what we see a lot of times is those families are doing the best that they can, and they're really have become foster parents out of a desire to embrace the dignity of these children that need homes. But they'll talk about the deep sense of isolation that they feel because the system, being in the foster system in some ways, is isolating. To be able to identify those families in our parishes and really to wrap our arms around them and support what they're doing, not necessarily, let's have everybody in the parish become certified as a foster family.
Right.
That's not everyone's call. Chandler and I like to joke there are certain people that should not be foster parents, right? But everybody can do something.
We touched on a little bit that you guys are going to be working multiple things in the parishes and multiple opportunities that people can help. Let's get into that. You go into a parish. Do they contact you first, or do you reach out to the parish community?
So it really depends. Oftentimes we have been contacted by individuals who have said, this sounds amazing. We'd like to be involved. Other times it's somebody that, I know at the parish. I'll kind of reach out and say, hey, would you be interested? Frequently the answer is yes. What a great opportunity. Mm-hmm. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be meeting with the campus ministers at our Newman centers, so our university kids, to get our young adults involved. And you think, well, a young adult can't be a foster parent if they're in college. And that's absolutely true, but there's a lot of other things that they can do. So I think social media, people have seen us, Chancery Advisory, Catholic Herald, all kinds of different ways that people have reached out.
So you guys go into the parish, there's a need, either you've recognized it or they've contacted you. What is it you guys do when working with them? What services or projects or programs are you guys setting up within a parish?
I think in a general sense, and this is where kind of our partnership with the diocese at Riverside Project, I think comes kind of to fruition. And so Julie kind of mentioned kind of what that relationship has looked like between the two of us. But that's where, generally speaking, we do this with all churches, not just Catholic churches, but we essentially walk churches kind of through a process. And that process essentially at the beginning looks like more of like an engagement process. And so it's to say, hey, either we've reached out to a particular parish or a parish has reached out to us or to Julie and said, hey, we are interested in this space and want to do work in this space. And I think what we found is churches enter into that point of saying, hey, we're interested in different ways. And so you have ranging kind of on a spectrum, right, of a church that would say, hey, we want to help and have no idea where to start. And then there are churches on the other end of the spectrum that says, hey, we've been doing this work for 5 years. We know what we're doing. We know where we want to be. But we want to be connected to other parishes that are doing this work too. And so it's kind of helping kind of facilitate this collaborative effort to say, hey, we're not all doing this hard thing by ourselves, but we actually get to do that together. We like to use the phrase, hey, we start with you, not us. And it's this idea of saying, hey, we recognize that your parish is already in existence and that you already do things and you already have staffing to that. And you're already probably doing really great things in the city. And so we want to, I think, A, acknowledge that, and B, just learn about it. And so we just come in and we just say, hey, like, we just want to learn about what you're already doing. What is the size of your parish? What does the staffing look like? What are the languages that are maybe spoken? Because believe it or not, even that like is just so like when you look at the child welfare space, just like language gaps that exist. And so there are particular churches who would say, hey, we have a lot of Spanish speakers or we have a Spanish ministry. And so there are particular ways that a church like that could be well positioned to serve in the space than a church that would say, hey, we're predominantly English speaking. And that's kind of where that starts. And so we kind of move from an engagement phase into more of an equipping phase. And that kind of phase is really what we talk about church leader training. And so we run a church leader training basically for all leaders within the space, from pastors to lay leaders and volunteers, to really kind of equip them with the language and the tools necessary to kind of operate in this space. So to develop a ministry, to develop teams, to I really give language to even how do we think about foster care alongside kind of, as we talked about earlier, with the different social issues that exist within our city. At the Riverside Project, in developing resources. And so we have different resources that we provide. We provide different churches with data within the child welfare space in different parts of the city. And so we really want to equip churches with the necessary tools to do the work really well. And then at the end of the day, we want to kind of help churches co-design a strategy so they don't have to do that by themselves, right? But then at the end of the day, right, we say this all the time, that if Riverside Project ceased to exist tomorrow, that a church has a strategy in place that they can own, and that work doesn't stop with the Riverside Project, and obviously alongside the diocese as well.
You know, practically speaking, what we'll do when a church contacts us is Chandler and I will usually go out, talk to either the pastor, the parochial vicar. Typically, there's an existing ministry that has been interested, whether it's a pro-life ministry, whether it's an outreach ministry like St. Vincent de Paul or Food Pantry, something like that. And so those will be the initial folks that we'll meet with. And we'll look at, as Chandler mentioned, okay, what are the demographics of your particular parish? As you might expect, certain areas of the diocese, there are many, many more licensed foster families than in other areas of the diocese. But then in those certain areas of the diocese with fewer licensed foster families, we have more children being removed. We have more families where there's been a kinship placement. So maybe older siblings raising younger siblings, that type of thing. So we want to look at that. Is there a residential home for foster youth in the area? That can be an area of service.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Like
a big part of what we do, so we have a direct partnership with the Department of Family and Protective Services to help provide zip code level data. And we use that data and we kind of compile it into what we call kind of data profiles. And so what we've done at the Riverside Project is taken the massive city of Houston, right, as a whole, and kind of broken that up into about 12 to 13 different what we call sectors, because it comes from the idea of recognizing that, hey, the three of us, right, could get in our cars after we record this podcast, drive in three completely opposite different directions of the city for 10 minutes, FaceTime each other, and we're in vastly different parts of the city, right? And so kind of recognizing that there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer to the foster care crisis that exists in Houston, right? And so I think what we try to do is try to utilize data alongside the unique positioning of churches and combine those things to say, hey, what is a way that your church is uniquely positioned to care for this demographic that exists in your part of the city? And so as an example, what we often see is, for example, in Spring Klein, there are more kids placed in foster homes than anywhere else in the city that are in foster care. Whereas in more like the south area of Houston, we see more removals, as Julie was mentioning. And so we look at those things to even help churches understand kind of what are the needs, because I've never met a church that says like, hey, we just want to do this thing, but we don't want it to help vulnerable kids and families. Right. And so being able to provide data and saying, hey, this is what's actually helpful in this area and in this space, then churches are able to understand that and then say, great, we're either already doing something that can address that need or that issue, or we can develop something out of our parish that helps address that need or that particular issue. So we use data a lot to kind of help us decide a little bit about kind of, hey, what are the needs here in this part of the city?
And recognizing that, as we said before, that we're talking about human beings, it's not just data points. It's not just a number, but that the needs are really holistic. Mm-hmm. It's not just physical needs like, food and clothing, but it's also the spiritual support. It's the psychological support. It's that need for community that's going to be so integral for not only addressing the needs of the individual children who are placed in the system, but also those families who are trying to offer that support and be that foundation for those young people. Well,
and that's been a really key issue, and that's why we're doing or asking involved parishes as they get involved, to take that survey that not only asks, what are people willing to do? How do people feel called to volunteer? But who are the individuals in our community that are maybe needing some additional support? Again, many foster families will talk about this being an isolating experience. Typically, you're dealing with children that have had some type of trauma, even if there's not been significant abuse in the home. Just the fact that that child has been removed from their family of origin and is now living with otherwise complete strangers is in and of itself a trauma that those foster parents, that foster child, any other siblings in the home are kind of trying to work with. And so can our communities come together to provide support groups for those families? Can we have parents' night out periodically so those families can just, anything that's relieving some of the pressure on that family to allow them to come back together and be re-energized in that mission that they've taken on.
So Riverside Project has been around for about how long now?
I want to say maybe 5 years now. Yeah.
So in all this time that you've done, because I think this is something that people want to hear about, is it sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
Is it actually going to make a difference? If we're going to invest this time, this energy, pulling resources from other places, whether it's specifically from the parish or just from individuals' time, that, well, if I'm helping here, then I don't have time to help with the catechetical ministry, or I can't help, I can't go to go pray the rosary that night at the church because I'm going to be helping. Does it work? I mean, what successes have you seen from these efforts that you've done?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a really good question. And I think even as Julie was talking about kind of the layers and levels of trauma that we see vulnerable kids and families kind of both entering, like bringing into the foster care system and, of course, bringing out of the foster care system. Something that we talk about pretty often at the Riverside Project is the idea of a lot of that trauma happened either because of or in, in relationships. And a lot of the healing work needs to happen within the context of relationships as well. And so for us, we see a huge opportunity, I think, for churches to enter into that relational work. Primarily because they're set up to do it really well. Because in an idealistic world, they're already doing that, right? Relational work. And so we want to help kind of bring awareness to and mobilize the church and for them to feel equipped to do that relational work really, really well with a very vulnerable population so that we can see healing happen. So I feel like, and this may be more broad than what you're asking, but one of the successes that we have seen is just the amount of people who have just raised their hands and the amount of churches who have just raised their hands and said, yes, we want to enter into that space and we want to be a part of not just doing this work, but doing it together. And so when we even talk about the amount of churches that are, and there are more than are just that are doing this work that are not connected to Riverside Project, but just as an example, when we talk about the amount of churches that have just said, hey, we want to be a part of this collaborative effort together, and seeing different churches connect to one another and host parents' night outs and giving breaks and things like that, I think is a success in itself to see people relationally invested into specific areas. But we've seen churches, I think, get connected to different mentorship opportunities. And so you think about a kid who at one point didn't have a mentor, but a church stepped in and said, hey, we'll be that mentor. We've seen churches kind of step in, and not all of this is directly connected to Riverside Project per se, but we've seen churches step into spaces and say, hey, we interacted with this kid at a residential treatment center or a group home, and we were just volunteers showing up and playing basketball to saying, hey, we'll actually open our doors to that kid, or we'll serve that staff really well. And so those are just a couple of examples where we see churches kind of stepping into these spaces where there was once a kid or an adult who didn't have the support that they needed to get on dry ground. But there are churches all across our city who are saying, hey, we can be that person, or we can be that church for that family, right?
So if a parish wants to get involved, Julie, and say, hey, we have something here, or we see a need here, how do they contact you?
So you can find me on the website, Archdiocesan website. Call, email, just let us know. that you're interested, we would be happy to chat. And typically, again, the first step will be to schedule a meeting out at your parish with Chandler, with me, just to talk about where is your parish? What are some existing ministries that we may be able to draw on? You've also got in those existing ministries people with specific skills that may transfer very nicely to something like the St. Joseph Ministry. We will look at, one of the things that is funny is people will, oftentimes they'll have an idea, well, we would like to do this, and that may be wonderful. There may be a great need for that. But it may be that 10 other parishes or churches in the area are already taking on that work. And so we may say, well, there's not really a need for that, but how about this? It's really an opportunity, I think, too, to get young people involved. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of interest from our youth groups and our young adults groups, and the energy that we see around that is really inspiring. In fact, I think one parish is kind of forming a young adults group around this ministry because it gives them kind of a ready-made project to engage in, which is really neat. But again, you go back to this idea of, well, young adults, college students, what can they do? They can't be foster parents. Could they babysit for a foster family? Mm-hmm. So a lot of people don't know, if you are a licensed foster family, you can't just go to your next door neighbor or your sister and say, can you babysit my foster kids because I need to take my other child to the doctor or I need to run errands. You can't do that. It's got to be somebody that themselves is licensed through the system. And so that kind of adds to the isolation of where do I find this person that can help me in the way that any other family would get help. Well, you can get, most young adults could offer a Saturday afternoon once a month to help watch some kids. The certification process is fairly simple. It can be done online. Other opportunities, can young adults bring meals to a family? Yeah. Can you stop by Chick-fil-A is always our favorite example. Can you stop by Chick-fil-A and drop something at someone's house so that family doesn't have to cook that night? Just simple things like that. It doesn't have to be complicated. Mm-hmm. And then of course, when we start talking about things like, well, I would like to mentor a young adult aging out of foster care, that tends to be one that resonates with a lot of people. Oh, it must be terrible to be an 18-year-old and have no adult support, and that's true. It is terrible, but that also requires a level of commitment that we don't really want parishes to jump into that deep end until there's already some commitment. Because if you can imagine, oh yes, I'd like to mentor a young adult. And so you start meeting with that young adult and you realize, wow, there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of depression, anxiety, maybe mental health issues. This is really stressful and hard. And then after 2 weeks, you say, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Well, you've not sent the greatest message, either about the church or just about the support that young person needs. And so for things like that are that larger level of commitment, we want people to get to that point. We want parishes to get to that point. We don't necessarily want people to jump into that deep end. As a first step, maybe we're looking at, oh, could we help with meals? Oh, could we help with babysitting? Could we have an event for foster children in our area at the parish? That kind of thing. And then later, let's get to that. We're going to go deep.
Yeah. Not everybody is called or can even open their homes to be a foster parent. And there are those that maybe can and are willing and are able to do that. Great. But not everybody can do that. But to break it down to the point where it's like, hey, but everybody can do something. And to really recognize, hey, and really ask the question, hey, what is my something? And that type of question works for an individual to say, hey, what's my something that I can do here? And I mentioned this earlier because this was kind of how like my personal background of like stepping into the space was saying, hey, I can play basketball with a junior high kid. And I'm actually really good at beating junior high kids in basketball. And like, I can do that. I couldn't open my home. I wasn't like in a spot to mentor or anything like that. But hey, on a Thursday night, I can play basketball with a kid. And so maybe that's someone's something, right? Or maybe someone says, hey, and we've seen these types of things come across. Who says, hey, I actually like own this business, like, and this is what my business could do. From all the way to churches to say, hey, what is our something, right? And that can be based again on their particular ministry that they already have, their particular part of the city, the things that they're already engaged in, saying, hey, this can be our something. And so I think that's the big idea here, right? Is to say, hey, how can we help parishes and individuals like discover what their something is?
Even like as you're talking, I'm thinking of our parishes that have an employment ministry as part of their outreach ministry. Yeah. So we work with people to help them write resumes, learn interview skills,
right.
Tips and tricks for handling an interview, kids aging out of foster care or even teens that are in foster care. Yeah. That can be a wonderful existing ministry that can just be tweaked slightly to encompass this population. We're such an individualistic culture that so many kids, it's, the individual is the the prime unit of society. Is like, no, this is about, we're really reinforcing that idea of the importance of family, of serving people maybe that don't look like us, that don't have the same life experience, but still able to come together and be in community with those families. And so we're really, I think a secondary benefit of it is, what are we teaching our kids about family and the importance of family, just through our own actions?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. And I think we talk about this a lot in our church leader trainings and things like this, but just helping different churches and even individuals just really think through this idea of, hey, we want to be the type of people who step towards hard things, not away from them. And so I think, as you're even saying, it's like helping our kids, and our families just understand that, like, hey, we're the type of family and the individual that just does hard things, and we don't have to do them alone. But we are the type of people who do hard things. We're the type of parish that does hard things, and helping kind of disciple our people towards that, I think is an idea there. So.
It's that idea, picking up our cross.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
But we recognize the need. We recognize our call as Christians, as people of faith, to love one another.
Right.
Yeah. And this is just a beautiful, beautiful ministry that the Archdiocese is undertaking. Julie, Chandler, thank you so much for being with us here today. Really appreciate you sharing this with us. And if people want to learn more about the St. Joseph Foster Ministry, they can find that online on our website at archgh.org/pro-life. All the information about St. Joseph Foster Care Ministry will be there, and we'll go ahead and put a link to that in the show notes for this episode.
Wonderful.
Chandler, if they wanted to find out more specifically about the Riverside Project and what it is you guys do, maybe not so much for their church, but maybe they have another organization or a business that they want to get involved, how can they contact you?
Yeah, they can just go to our website and fill out a contact form at the bottom of the website, and that's at riversideproject.org.
And we'll include that in the show notes as well.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you both again for joining us here today.
Yeah,
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for having us.
Once again, if you want to find out more about the ministries and offices of the Archdiocese, you can visit us online at archgh.org. That's archgh.org. We'll talk to you next time here on Around the Archdiocese.